Mara Voss packed 3 things the morning she became someone's wife. 1 dress, 1 coin purse, 1 knife she was not supposed to have. The knife went into her boot. Her father stood in the doorway of her room and watched her fold the dress into a cloth bag. He had the look he always wore when he was about to say something he had already decided on. Chin up, eyes slightly past her, as if the conversation were already finished and he was just waiting for her to catch up. "The Alpha King is not a cruel man," he said. Mara said nothing. "This is a good arrangement. For the family. For the pack." She pulled the drawstring on the bag closed. "You said that already. I'm saying it again." She picked up the bag and turned to face him. She had her mother's eyes. Everyone had always told her that, usually in a tone that made it sound like a warning. She had never understood why. "I know what this is," she said. "You don't have to dress it." He stepped aside to let her pass. She walked out into a gray morning, with her bag over one shoulder and the knife warm against her ankle, and she did not look back at the house. Not because she wasn't going to miss it, because she had already said goodbye to it in her head 3 days ago, when the decree arrived, and doing it twice seemed like more than the situation deserved. "The Alpha King's court was made of black stone." She had heard that. Everyone had heard that. What no one mentioned was how it absorbed light, not dramatically, not like something out of a story, but practically, the way thick curtains do. The whole place felt like late afternoon, even at midday. Wolves stood at every door. They watched her arrive the way the border wolves used to watch unfamiliar animals crossing into territory. Not aggressive, not welcoming, just watching, filing her away. The ceremony was short. She was grateful for that. She stood at the front of a cold room and did not look at the ceiling or the crowd. She looked at the man at the end of the aisle, because looking away would have seemed like fear, and she was not afraid. She was practical. There was a difference. Kale Dravon was not what she expected. She had expected something louder, more deliberate in its power. What she got was a man who stood very still and took up space without trying, broad-shouldered, dark-eyed, dressed in black with no ornamentation, as if he had considered the ceremony for exactly as long as necessary and then stopped thinking about it. He did not look at her until the officiant said her full name, Mara Elise Voss. Then he looked, and something happened. She could not have named it. It was not attraction, or not only that. It was more like the moment before a storm, when the air pressure changes and every animal in the field goes quiet at the same time. He went still, the kind of still that is not peace but its opposite, the stillness of something paying very close attention. She filed that away too. The officiant said words. They repeated words. There was a ring, cold on her finger. Someone in the back of the room coughed, and then it was done, and she was married to the Alpha King of 6 territories, and she still had a knife in her boot, and she thought, fine. Fine, fine, fine. The weeks that followed were an education. The court was its own creature, a living thing made of glances and carefully worded compliments and conversations that meant 3 different things depending on who was in the room. Mara had grown up in the borderlands, where people said what they meant because the weather was bad and life was short. The court was the opposite of the borderlands in every way. She learned to read it the way she had learned to read the border, by staying quiet and watching until the patterns became clear. The advisors were skeptical. The senior betas were watchful. There were 2 women in the court who looked at her with the particular cold amusement of people who had expected to marry a king and had not, and Mara understood their feelings completely, even if she had no interest in their approval. She did not make herself small. She made herself uninteresting, which was different. She spoke when spoken to. She asked questions that revealed nothing. She ate her meals and attended what she was required to attend, and went back to her rooms and sat on the edge of her bed and thought, I can do this. This is survivable. What she did not expect was Kale. 3 weeks in, he asked her to stay after a border council meeting, just her. The advisors filed out with careful neutral expressions, which meant they were surprised, which they would not show. He put a map on the table, the eastern border, a dispute that had been running for 2 generations, contested land, complicated history. Tell me what you see, he said. She looked at him, then she looked at the map. She told him what she saw. The water rights were the real issue, not the land. The land dispute was what everyone argued about, But the water was what people needed, and whoever controlled the creek controlled the argument. She said it plainly, the way she said everything. He looked at the map for a long moment. No one has said that. No one from the borderlands has looked at it. Something shifted in his face. Not softened. He did not seem like a man who softened easily, but something adjusted. She was recategorized somewhere inside him. She could feel it, and she wasn't sure how she felt about being categorized by anyone, but she supposed it was better than being dismissed. After that, he kept asking. She kept answering. His wolf, she could sense it under his skin sometimes, the way you can sense weather through a wall, shifted every time she was in a room. She noticed this the way she noticed everything, quietly, without comment, filing it away. The envoy from the eastern mountains arrived on a Tuesday, which already felt like a bad sign. Mara had never trusted Tuesdays. He was tall, silver-haired, with the particular bearing of someone who had spent a long time being important and expected rooms to remember it. He sat across from Kale at the council table and spoke at length about trade and alliance and mutual interest, and Mara sat 2 seats down and watched him. He had not looked at her once, and then he did. It was the look Kale's wolf gave her, that sharp, assessing stillness. From this man, a stranger, directed at her across a council table. It lasted only a second before he returned his attention to Kale, but she had seen it. Near the end of the meeting, he said something in the old tongue. An aside, casual, the kind of remark people make when they assume no one else in the room will understand it. She understood it. She had always understood it. She had thought everyone understood it, and simply not spoken it aloud. It was only now, watching the faces of the advisors around the table, blank, uncomprehending, that she realized she was the only one who had followed it. The words were about her mother. After the envoy left, Kale looked at her. The room had emptied except for them. He had the still expression he wore when he was thinking something he had not yet decided to say. "Your mother's name," he said. "Say it." She said it. The room changed. She did not know how else to describe it. Nothing moved, no wind, no sound, but the quality of the air shifted, and in her chest, something she had believed her whole life was too small to matter, rose like smoke in a chimney finally unblocked. Her wolf. The one her father had always called weak. The one she had been told barely counted. It rose, and it was not small. It had never been small. The archive records came out the next morning. Kale's eldest advisor, a man who had not once spoken to Mara directly in the weeks she had been in the court, placed them on the war room table with both hands, flat, like someone laying down a surrender. She read them standing up, because sitting felt like the wrong posture for what she was reading. Her mother had not died in a border skirmish. Her mother had been hidden. The Vale bloodline, the royal line that the current dynasty had been built on top of, the one predating the Alpha Kings by 3 centuries, the one every history book described as extinct, was not extinct. It was standing in the war room, reading archive records in a dress from the borderlands. Mara had been told she was a footnote in a treaty, a useful body, something to be placed somewhere. It would cause the least amount of trouble. She was not a footnote. She was, by blood, 300 years older than Kale's throne, the original claim. She set the papers down. She looked at Kale across the table. "So you didn't marry me to settle a border dispute," she said. The room was very quiet. "No," he said. And then, because he was a man who did not qualify things, "My wolf has been bowing to you since the ceremony." He did not say it like a confession. He said it like a fact he had decided to stop withholding. She received it like a confession anyway. The knowledge did not stay contained. It never does. By evening, the court knew. By the next morning, it had split. Those who saw her bloodline as a restoration of something lost, those who saw it as a threat to everything standing, and a third group, smaller and quieter and more dangerous, who wanted her gone before she fully understood what she carried. The servant who tried to harm her was not a servant. Mara found this out at the end of a hallway on a night she had not been able to sleep and had gone walking because closed rooms made her feel like she was waiting for something. She had the knife in her boot. She always had the knife in her boot. And she had grown up in the borderlands, where you learn to hear things that are trying not to make sound. It was not graceful. It was not a story she would tell later with any pleasure. But she was standing at the end of it, and the other person was not, and the knife was in her hand, and the hallway was silent. Cale found her 2 minutes later. She didn't know how he knew. She suspected his wolf. He looked at her, then at the hallway, then at the knife. He said her name. Not her title, not her full name, just Mara. She didn't know why that was the thing that got through all of it, through the practical, careful, self-contained person she had built across 24 years of being considered disposable. It just did. She didn't cry. She wasn't someone who cried easily, and this was not the moment to start. But something in her chest shifted, and he must have seen it, because he took one step toward her and stopped and waited, which was exactly the right thing to do. She took the step instead. She addressed the court herself. No prepared remarks, no speech vetted by advisors, just Mara, standing at the front of the council chamber, with the archive records in her hands, using the flat and direct voice that the Borderlands had given her. She did not claim the title. She said, "The Bloodline exists. Here is the documentation. Here is the history. What this means for the court is the court's question to work out. But the fact of it is not a question, and she would not be pretending otherwise, and anyone who wanted to argue the documentation was welcome to read it themselves, and the archive was open." She put the records on the table. She stepped back. Cale stood beside her the entire time, not in front, not speaking for her. Beside her, which was different, and which she understood was a deliberate choice, and which she filed away in the part of herself that had started to trust him without fully deciding to. The court argued. The court would keep arguing. These things do not resolve in a single afternoon. History does not fold up neatly. But the shape of the room changed that day, and Mara felt it, and her wolf felt it too, steadier now inside her chest, more present, less like smoke, and more like something with weight. Weeks passed. Things settled without fully resolving, which is how most real things go. The treaty was rewritten. This time her name was at the top. The alliance with the Eastern Mountains collapsed, and then restructured under new terms. 3 members of the court who had been involved with the people who sent the false servant were removed quietly. Cale was efficient about it. She noticed he was always efficient about things that mattered and unbothered by the things that didn't, and she had started to find that quality genuinely restful, which surprised her. They did not have a conversation about what they were. What they had was a council meeting where she contradicted him in front of 8 people, and he listened and changed his position, without flinching, without making her pay for it later. A late evening in the archive where she was reading and he was present for no apparent reason, and neither of them felt the need to explain it. The first time he told her something about himself that had nothing to do with territory or politics. Something small, something true, and she understood that, from a man like him, small true things were the largest things he knew how to offer. She told him something back. Neither of them named what that was. On a night in late autumn, with the archive light yellow and the rest of the court long asleep, her wolf rose. Not in danger. Not in fear, not because anything demanded it. Just because she was sitting beside someone, and the room was quiet, and nothing was required of her, and for the first time in her life, that felt like something she was allowed to have. She said nothing about it. He didn't ask. His wolf, she realized, had been still for weeks now. Not the alert, paying attention stillness of their first meeting. Something else. Something she didn't have a Borderlands word for. She thought about it for a while. Then she closed the record she had been reading and set it on the table and looked at the lamp. There was a small moth circling the flame, careful, getting closer than it should, then pulling back, then closer again. She watched it for a long time. She did not warn it away.